There may be original work beneath this.
After 15 years, we may be just a few feet above original work.
For more than 230 years, Oak Island has guarded a mystery that has consumed fortunes, buried secrets, and defeated generations of treasure hunters. Since 1795, more than 1,000 excavations have been carried out, with over $100 million spent searching for what may be hidden beneath the island. But now, something has changed. A new investigation has produced a discovery that could completely rewrite the Oak Island story. After analyzing more than 4,800 scanning points, 38 deep core samples, and months of geological data, researchers identified a suspicious underground structure nearly 180 feet below the surface, and the estimated potential value nearly $105 million. But the money isn't even the most shocking part. Multiple boreholes appear to have recorded the same underground anomalies. Ground imaging revealed unusually symmetrical boundaries, while core samples produced evidence that forced experts to take another look at what lies beneath the island. Lagina and his team are now examining every signal, every metal trace, and every geological clue to determine whether this is finally the evidence Oak Island hunters have been waiting for. So, is the legendary treasure really buried 180 feet below the island? What exactly did the latest scans and core samples reveal? And could this $105 million discovery finally bring the 230-year-old Oak Island mystery to an end? Before we uncover the evidence, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon, because what we're about to reveal could completely change the way you see Oak Island forever. Let's begin. Back in 1795, a group of people discovered something unusual on Oak Island, a strange depression in the ground that would eventually become the center of one of the world's most enduring treasure mysteries. At the time, nobody could have imagined that this seemingly ordinary discovery would trigger more than 2 centuries of searching. Since then, the island has been subjected to over 1,000 excavations, hundreds of boreholes, and countless scientific investigations. More than $100 million has reportedly been spent in the pursuit of answers. Yet every time researchers appeared to be getting close, the truth seemed to slip away once again. Over the years, investigators uncovered layers of ancient-looking wood, unusual stone formations, and unexplained underground signals that left even experienced experts questioning what was really beneath the island. But now, the investigation has entered a completely different phase. Researchers have begun using more sophisticated ground scanning systems, deep core drilling, and digital geological mapping techniques to examine the area in unprecedented detail. Early results revealed several underground anomalies detected from different locations, and remarkably, many of them appeared to point toward the same section of the island. Some of these signals repeatedly appeared at a depth of approximately 180 feet, raising the possibility that the material beneath the surface might not be nothing more than natural rock. Instead, the data suggested that a substantial man-made structure could potentially be hidden below. This is where the controversial $105 million theory entered the picture. Based on preliminary geological estimates and underground mapping, researchers suggested that if the anomaly turned out to be an ancient chamber containing historically significant artifacts, the combined value could potentially approach $105 million. The possibility quickly generated enormous interest, with people around the world asking the same question. What had the latest investigation uncovered that was so different from everything that came before? When the new phase of the investigation began, Rick Lagina and his team emphasized that they wanted evidence rather than speculation. The first step was an extensive high-resolution scan of the area. Over several weeks, researchers collected more than 4,800 individual scanning points, creating a detailed picture of the underground environment. They then extracted more than 38 deep-core samples from different locations, carefully documenting the depth, direction, and exact position of every sample so the laboratory results could later be compared against the imaging data. Then something unexpected began to emerge. The same unusual pattern started appearing across multiple scan reports. Around 180 feet below the surface, separate boreholes were detecting similar underground anomalies. Initially, the team considered the possibility that these signals were simply the result of natural geological formations. But as additional readings accumulated, that explanation became increasingly difficult to accept. Ground imaging data appeared to show straight boundaries and unusually symmetrical shapes, features that did not immediately resemble the irregular patterns normally associated with natural rock. Because of this, the experts decided to return to the same location for another series of scans and additional core drilling. When the second round of results produced patterns consistent with the original data, the mood inside the investigation team changed dramatically. Geologists, engineers, and archaeologists recognized that repeatedly detecting a similar structure across numerous independent scan points was unusual. Some researchers began considering whether the evidence could indicate an ancient chamber or another type of human-built underground structure, while others remained cautious and insisted that the findings needed to undergo complete scientific verification before any conclusion could be reached. Still, one question had now become impossible to ignore. What was actually hidden nearly 180 feet beneath Oak Island? To answer it, investigators combined the ground scanning results with the deep core samples and detailed 3D geological models. The combined analysis revealed several features that pushed the investigation in a new direction. The first and perhaps most striking feature was the apparent symmetry of the underground anomaly. Natural geological formations are generally irregular and unpredictable, yet several scans appeared to reveal straight lines, repeated boundaries, and balanced shapes. And that was only the beginning. These findings were exactly why researchers kept returning to this section of Oak Island for another examination. But the investigation soon produced another detail that caught everyone's attention. Several scan reports appeared to show unusually straight boundaries beneath the surface, almost as if different underground sections had been deliberately separated. Even more intriguing, multiple boreholes produced signals consistent with empty spaces. In other words, the equipment was detecting possible voids in areas where researchers had expected to find solid rock. When the individual readings were combined into a three-dimensional digital model, the picture became even more interesting. Several smaller suspected voids appeared to line up with what could potentially be one much larger underground space. Inside the war room, the reaction was immediate. Experts began seriously considering the possibility that these features might be connected to something constructed by humans. For some archaeologists, the combination of symmetrical boundaries and possible voids could represent one of the most significant discoveries ever associated with Oak Island, if further testing confirmed that they were artificial. However, not everyone was convinced. Several geologists continue to argue that unusual natural formations could potentially create similar patterns, and insisted that much more evidence was needed before reaching a conclusion. As additional data continued to arrive, however, the debates surrounding the possible treasure chamber became increasingly intense. Preliminary estimates suggested that if the underground space proved to be artificial and contained historically important artifacts or valuable metals, its potential historical and material value could approach $105 million. Even so, the investigation team stressed that no final conclusion would be made until excavation and laboratory testing provided definitive evidence. And that raised the next major question: what exactly could be hidden beneath the legendary money pit? The investigation then turned its attention back to the money pit itself, the location where the Oak Island mystery first emerged in 1795. This time, the team wanted to eliminate speculation and focus entirely on measurable evidence. New boreholes were drilled from multiple angles and at different depths in an attempt to reconstruct the underground environment, layer by layer. As the drilling continued deeper, several discoveries began changing the mood inside the war room. Among the first were fragments of wood recovered from multiple boreholes. Experts quickly pointed out that these pieces did not appear to be ordinary tree roots. Some showed shapes and edges that seemed consistent with having been cut or altered by people. Beneath some of these wooden layers, the drilling also encountered stone formations that appeared noticeably different from the surrounding natural rock. Geologists immediately began documenting and mapping the sequence of these layers. The possibility became more intriguing because if similar combinations of wood and stone were repeatedly encountered at different locations, they could potentially represent remnants of an underground construction rather than random geological material. Then came another unexpected development. Several core samples showed faint traces associated with metallic material. Those samples were immediately isolated and sent for further laboratory examination. The researchers remained careful not to make premature claims, but they acknowledged that repeatedly encountering wood fragments, unusual stone layers, and metallic traces within the same general zone was certainly worthy of further investigation. The team then went back to the ground imaging data and analyzed it once more. During this review, some experts noticed thin lines within the scans that appeared to extend between separate borehole locations. Suddenly, the possibility of an underground tunnel system returned to the center of the discussion. Some engineers suggested that the apparent connections could potentially indicate an old passage or tunnel network leading from the money pit toward a larger concealed chamber. Other scientists remained skeptical and emphasized that only direct excavation and complete laboratory analysis could determine whether these signals represented human construction or unusual geology. Still, the evidence had reached a point where it could no longer simply be ignored. The repeated appearance of wood fragments, unusual stone layers, metallic traces, and underground signals at approximately 180 feet convinced Marty Lagina that the investigation had entered a critical phase. He responded by calling an emergency meeting inside the war room. Geologists, mining engineers, archaeologists, survey specialists, and independent scientific experts were brought together to examine the evidence from every possible angle. For hours, the team went through the ground scan results, borehole records, core sample data, and every other piece of information collected during the investigation, searching for one answer. Were all these discoveries pointing toward the same hidden structure beneath Oak Island? The entire collection of borehole records and core samples was displayed once again across the large screens, inside the war room. Every detail was examined because the team had one priority above everything else. They could not afford a rushed decision that might permanently destroy evidence connected to a mystery that had remained unsolved for more than 2 centuries. When the meeting finally concluded, Rick Lagina made a significant decision. He brought together another group of highly experienced engineers, scientists, and specialists to take part in the next phase of the investigation. At the same time, the excavation strategy was completely redesigned. Instead of sending heavy machinery directly downward toward the suspected depth, the team would proceed carefully, one geological layer at a time. Every few feet, the excavation would pause so that soil, stone, wood, and any other material could be removed, separated, photographed, and documented before the digging continued. If even the smallest indication of a human-made structure appeared, the excavation would immediately stop. The location would then be preserved through detailed 3D mapping, high-resolution photography, and laboratory sampling before any further work could begin. Rick also introduced much stricter safety procedures. He made it clear that precision and preservation were more important than speed. Workers would not be permitted to enter potentially dangerous or sensitive areas without authorization, while specially designed protective containers were prepared to preserve every recovered artifact or sample. The team understood that one careless move could destroy evidence that might have historical importance far beyond any monetary value. As news of the revised excavation strategy spread, attention once again turned toward Oak Island. For the first time, it seemed that the team was preparing for an excavation unlike anything attempted before, one that could potentially bring them closer than ever to the truth. After months of scanning, drilling, mapping, and laboratory preparation, the moment Rick Lagina and his team had been waiting for finally arrived. The location, repeatedly identified by the ground scans, borehole readings, and preliminary laboratory results, was now ready for a carefully controlled excavation. But this was not going to be a conventional dig. The site was equipped with modern excavation machinery, precision drilling equipment, laser surveying systems, and advanced digital monitoring technology. Separate groups of engineers, geologists, archaeologists, and safety specialists were assigned specific responsibilities so that every change underground could be recorded as soon as it occurred. The most important adjustment involved the way the excavation itself would be conducted. Rick instructed the team to advance gradually through the ground, rather than digging directly to the suspected final depth. After every 3 to 5 feet, the operation would pause. Soil, rocks, wood fragments, and other materials would be carefully separated and examined. If the workers discovered even the slightest indication of a constructed feature, metallic object, or possible ancient chamber, the heavy equipment would be shut down immediately. Everyone understood the stakes. A single careless action could potentially damage evidence connected to a mystery that had remained alive for more than 230 years. At the same time, continuous laser surveying was used to document the excavation zone. A detailed 3-dimensional model was created after each new layer was exposed, allowing experts to compare the underground environment before and after excavation. Borehole locations, stone formations, sample positions, and underground signals were continuously added to the digital system. Researchers believed these records could become invaluable if any discovery needed to be independently reviewed in the future. Rick Lagina therefore made precise documentation one of the central principles of the entire operation. The exact location, depth, orientation, recovery time, and condition of every sample were recorded separately. Nothing was removed from the site for further analysis until it had been photographed, filmed, and documented using high-resolution cameras and aerial drone imaging. The team knew that if the controversial $105 million treasure theory contained any truth, the most convincing evidence would ultimately have to come from the science. And now, that evidence was beginning to reach the laboratories. Samples collected during the excavation were transported for detailed analysis because the team understood that machines could reveal where something was located, but only scientific testing could help determine what it actually was. Wood fragments, stone samples, metallic traces, and different soil layers were carefully separated and sent to specialized laboratories for independent examination. Inside the war room, anticipation was building as everyone waited for the same thing: the final scientific results. The first major stage involved analyzing the metallic traces. Specialists began determining whether the material was simply the result of naturally occurring mineral deposits, or whether it showed characteristics consistent with an ancient, human-made object. At the same time, the recovered wood fragments were sent for further testing to determine their age, composition, and possible origin. The wood samples were sent for carbon dating to establish their actual age. If the analysis showed that the material had been buried for hundreds of years, it could provide important support for the theory that the underground features were connected to an older, human-made structure. Researchers also examined the surrounding soil through detailed chemical testing. Their goal was to determine whether the different layers had developed naturally or whether they showed signs of deliberate excavation, movement, or refilling by people in the distant past. Then came perhaps the most critical stage of the investigation: the geological assessment. Geologists brought together the ground scanning results, core samples, and laboratory findings to build a much more detailed, three-dimensional model of the underground area. Several signals detected at different locations appeared to correspond with one another, making the possibility of a connected structure even more intriguing. However, Rick Lagina insisted that no discovery would be treated as confirmed until it had passed independent scientific review. For that reason, the reports and samples were submitted to additional specialists and separate laboratories, allowing the results to be examined without relying on a single team or a single interpretation. When the first verification results finally returned, the atmosphere inside the war room became extremely tense. Some of the findings were consistent with the original analysis, while other results introduced new questions that made the mystery even harder to explain. Now, everything depended on the final scientific verdict. The question everyone wanted answered was simple: could there really be